The Wilhelm Gustloff. She was the ultimate Nazi dream ship. She was built to take loyal German workers on the holiday of a lifetime. By 1945, the Gustloff was their last refuge. On the 30th of January, she was hit by Russian torpedoes.
And Mother yelled, "Children, out, out, we've hit a mine."
Thousands are caught below decks.
We're not going to die. I don't want to die.
For the 10,000 people on board, it's a struggle for life and death. A struggle more than 9,000 will lose. The story of the Gustloff had begun 2 weeks earlier, in January 1945. It is the calm before the storm, when it is still possible to hope.
One woman said that our Führer won't allow the Russians into our beautiful East Prussia. We hoped right to the end. It was so unimaginable to just leave everything, to just go.
12th of January 1945. The Red Army's assault on East Prussia begins. For the Germans, this battle is already lost, and their generals know it.
If you look at the Eastern Army Group's plans, they had no idea what to do. They had far too little equipment, they had no petrol, they had too few weapons, the soldiers were exhausted, and basically they knew that when the Russians attacked, they would make big operational breakthroughs.
The world's biggest land army is advancing along a 1,500-kilometer front, deep into Germany's East Prussian provinces. They have absolute superiority. And they want revenge.
An eye for an eye, a life for a life. Deep inside, each of us only had that one thought. They couldn't expect sympathy from us. No way, no, no, no. They came to us with a sword, now they will die by the sword.
These are the pictures the Red Army soldiers carry with them. 3 years of German brutality in their Russian homeland. Murder and destruction on a scale never seen before. And unbearable suffering.
Millions and millions of innocent civilians died. They were our people. Our villages and towns were destroyed, along with so much property. Of course, that made us want revenge. It made us want to get our own back.
Now German towns are burning. German civilians dying. The Nazi leadership won't help them leave. These pictures are deceptive. Only a lucky few get their ticket west.
If you wanted to take a train, you needed a special permit. Trains are there to carry guns. You can ride when victory comes. That was written up at every station.
The Nazi in charge of East Prussia is Erich Koch. He refuses to allow civilians to leave. He plays the caring father figure for the cameras. He'll be one of the first to save his own skin.
Most often it was the party leaders who fled first, without giving the order to evacuate. Basically the same thing happened everywhere. The front came closer and closer, and then retreating German army units came past and said, "Get out of here, the Russians are coming." And there were still no orders to evacuate.
Waiting can be fatal. Plenty of families have already packed their wagons with the bare essentials in spite of the ban. They form up in long caravans of women, children and old people. All the men are on the front line. Hundreds of thousands take to the long, straight roads of East Prussia. Many of them are on their way to the Wilhelm Gustloff. The refugees have to share the roads to the west with the German army.
The orders were clear. The wagons had to get off the roads. The generals commanding army groups and individual armies passed the order down the line. And those pictures, those terrible pictures of the wagons lying in ditches. It's perfectly possible the Wehrmacht did that. They cracked down hard.
The Red Army are approaching the Baltic, cutting off East Prussia from the rest of Germany. On the 21st of January, the Soviets reached the Baltic port of Elbing, where Naval Auxiliary Ursula Rezas is stationed.
There was a thundering and a thudding, and the door was ripped open, and a soldier stood there shouting, "Move, move, the Russians are here. Their tanks have reached the town."
Ursula Rezas quits Elbing as the Soviets take over. East Prussia is completely cut off. Now there are only two ways to the west: by ship from the port of Pillau near Königsberg, or over the frozen coastal waters of the Huff. Their goal is Gotenhafen. That's where the big ships are waiting. And they know that one of them is the Wilhelm Gustloff. But the ships here are reserved for the army. They have commandeered every freight ship to transport men and equipment so that the war can go on.
This was how a ship's load was allocated. 40% for the wounded, 40% military equipment, 20% refugees. The military had absolute priority. And it wasn't about saving refugees. That was what you might call coincidental. It was improvised. You took refugees along if you happened to have the space.
The Wilhelm Gustloff is the Nazis' dream ship. Since 1940, it's been a floating barracks, a U-boat training school. Now the order has been given to bring its 1,000 U-boat cadets back to Kiel in Western Germany to fight. And to bring refugees too, if there's room. But between the Gustloff and many of the refugees lie the frozen waters of the Huff. And this is the coldest winter in decades.
You kept walking, keep going, faster, keep going. The faster the better. Everyone was scared. Country people were afraid to be driving over the water, over the ice.
Many wagons do fall through the ice. No one stops to help. No one can help. And the Russians have a clear field of fire.
There were more refugees than you could count, and we attacked them from our planes. On the Huff, on the sandbar of the Nerum, close to Königsberg, It was just a massacre. God knows how many people were killed. Tens of thousands of people were crossing the ice. It was impossible to miss them. The Germans got back what they had done to us. That's why they couldn't expect any sympathy from us.
Even today, no one knows how many were killed. Certainly tens of thousands. And the Russian tanks are close behind.
I remember driving right by some of those wagons. I wasn't the least bit interested whether the civilians on them were alive or dead. We had to advance. Forwards, forwards, forwards.
Russian tanks overtake the stragglers on the trek. "17-year-old Hildegard Rauschenbach is one of them.
And that first night, I became acquainted with these people. I said to my mother, "Mama, I don't want to live through another night like that."
Many women could have told the same story.
I hid in the straw, and they started stabbing with pitchforks. And I pretended to be ill, as though I was going to be sick. And then 3 or 4 came in, and one pointed a pistol at me. I said, "Shoot me, shoot me."
The Soviets begin to organize a transport of women to forced labor camps in Siberia. Hildegard Rauschenbach is rounded up.
And then the interpreter said to me, "Officer, ask you, you want to stay with him? Then when soldiers go, you go back to Mama, Papa, or to Siberia?" And without a moment's thought, I answered, "To Siberia."
Hildegard Rauschenbach spent 5 years in a Siberian camp. Today, she feels no bitterness about that time. Königsberg, capital of East Prussia. The Nazis declare it a fortress city. With most of the army gone, teenagers and old men will defend it to the death. German civilians are again forced to make their own decisions, like the family of 12-year-old Jürgen Danol.
Granddad said they've made Königsberg a fortress city. Out, out. We have to make sure we get out of here to Pillau to see if we can get a ship. So we set off. Come on, children, come on.
40 kilometers on foot, 20 degrees below zero.
Anyone who couldn't go on sat down in the ditch beside the road. I saw a few people sitting down a little way back, you know. And you wondered, what are they doing there? They've got to get up. They're already all white. And at some point, God had taken pity on them, and he'd sent this great shroud.
This is the port of Pillau. The last few small boats leave from here to Gotenhafen.
The people were just standing there. Then Mother yelled, "I have 4 children, my father." Then they had to let us on. The others had to stay behind.
It's a freezing overnight trip from Pillau to Gotenhafen. They arrive to find the city spilling over with refugees, most of them desperate to get on the Gustloff. Helmut Engler has been drafted in to help in the chaos.
Gotenhafen had 240,000 inhabitants, and then came 120,000 more. Every one of them, without exception, whether they were children or adults, they all looked at the very end of their tether. It was a hard thing to see.
In this situation, it's the children who are suffering most.
There was a woman standing there with a child, tucked in a pillow. I can still see it quite clearly. She was holding the pillow around the child. The child was dead, but the woman didn't see that. She kept looking at this child. It was dead, but she held it in her arms. It was her child.
To the waiting people, the Wilhelm Gustloff is a symbol of hope. But she's in a restricted military area. No one gets on without a pass.
We were registered. We were in the Navy. We had papers we could present. We belonged.
There are tickets for especially big families and for some privileged categories.
They sorted through these people, checking for party membership. That still counted at first. But the people on the quayside were hungry. They were thirsty. They were freezing. They pushed their way onto the ship. They couldn't do anything about it. They had to let them on.
By the 30th of January, no one is keeping a record of who's on board the Gustloff. Jürgen Danel and his family are simply happy to be there.
Mother said, now we've made it, children. No more wet gloves, no wet feet. It was a poem, it was hope.
And still they pile on board. By the end, there are probably well over 10,000 passengers.
In all the great salons, people were lying next to each other, mattress next to mattress, one with a mother and two children, and everything completely full. The smell got stronger and stronger. Babies pooed in their nappies. The old people couldn't make it to the toilets because the corridors were too crowded.
Naval Auxiliary Ursula Rezas is on board with her sister Rosemarie. They've grabbed a corner in one of the salons.
There were 300 naval auxiliaries. They were all billeted in the swimming pool, and we wanted to join them. But there wasn't any room left, so we were stuck in the corner of a salon.
The Navy girls are happy to be safe on the great ship. But the Gustloff's officers are worried. The ship has not been to sea for 5 years. It's a long time since her glory days. There are too few lifeboats for this exceptional load, and the ship has suffered bomb damage.
They ordered extra lifeboats. They were in just as short supply as the life jackets. So they brought up big cutters and a crane, hoisted them onto the upper deck, and put them in position.
Rafts are loaded on too. There's still only capacity for half the passengers, but it hardly matters, even for people who should know better.
I thought, we are safe now, and this unsinkable ship is going to take us west.
For the past few months, Soviet submarines have been breaking through into the Baltic. As singletons, they haven't yet made a great impression.
In previous years, they had only limited success. So it could well be that the Germans rather underestimated the danger from Soviet submarines.
To protect merchant ships from torpedo attacks, you need escorts. But by 1945, cruisers and destroyers are in short supply in the Baltic. Even Even though they know of the submarine risk, the Gustloff decides not to wait for an escort. At 12:30 on 30th of January 1945, the Wilhelm Gustloff leaves harbour. By 3 o'clock, the Gustloff has reached the open sea, making for Kiel. On the bridge, there are heated discussions about the route she should be taking. The Gustloff's official captain is Friedrich Petersen. He's a merchant marine officer. On this occasion, there are 2 additional captains and a first officer with a captain's license. The 1,000 U-boat cadets on board are under the command of Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Zahn. Arguments erupt on the bridge, particularly about the course they should take. There are 2 possibilities. If they stay close to the coast, they're safe from submarines, but these waters are mined. There's a deep water route known as Emergency Route 58, which is regularly swept clear of mines. Submarines could be lurking here, but if all goes well, this is the quicker route. Gustloff's U-boat crews are expected in Kiel as soon as possible. The captains decide on the faster route. Soviet submarine S-13 is cruising close to the Gustloff. It has been on patrol since the 11th of January 1945, with a clear mission.
Our mission was the same as always, to destroy the enemy. We were to look for transport ships and sink them.
S-13's commander, Alexander Marinesko, could do with a success. His patrol should have started on the 2nd of January, but he was on a bender and no one could find him. That is high treason. This is his last chance to redeem himself. He has yet to see a single German ship. Then S-13 receives a signal. The German freighters are beginning their evacuation to the west. On the Gustloff, the war seems far away.
Next to us there sat 2 East Prussian farmers' daughters, I think, plump and very gay and rosy cheeks. They were simply adorable, laughing and telling each other jokes and getting to know people, and there was a very good atmosphere on the ship.
Es war eine gute Stimmung auf dem Schiff.
16-year-old Eva Boden and her sister Dorit are on the Gustloff with their mother. They're refugees from Copenhagen.
We felt we were already safe.
It could be a busy night on Emergency Route 58. Gustloff's commanders are concerned about a possible collision with other German ships in the dark. After a heated debate on the bridge, the captains decide to switch on the navigation lights. This is in contravention of all the rules. The Gustloff continues her progress. An hour later, the lights are switched off again. It's too late. S-13 has spotted her and takes up pursuit. S-13 is too slow to keep up with its target underwater. The Gustloff is advancing quickly. The submarine surfaces to increase its speed. Two hours later, by 8 p.m., S-13 has caught up with the Gustloff. The crew go to action stations. They know this is a sizable target.
From the sound, I could hear that it was a twin screw ship. That meant it had to be very big. If it had been an ordinary freighter, it would have sounded like this. But you couldn't tell from the sound of the propellers whether it was a warship or not.
When he looked through his periscope, Marinesco could see that it was big, and it wasn't a warship. But he couldn't tell what it was carrying, wood, or weapons, or people. How could he tell that? He was simply pursuing a big transport ship. That was all. He was following his orders to sink large warships and freighters. And that's what he did.
Marinesco decides on a daring maneuver. He will sail right round the Gustloff and attack from the shore side. Gustloff's lookouts will be concentrating on the other direction. And this is the best chance he has to evade any escort ships in the darkness.
If we had been spotted by convoy escorts, that would have been the end of us. We would never have got out of there alive.
As S-13 describes its great loop around the Gustloff, on board the cruise ship, the passengers are reminded of something they had almost forgotten. Today is the 12th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power. The Führer addresses the nation. The tone has become familiar over the years. The need for a steadfast heart. The need to hold out everywhere under all circumstances until the nation's efforts are finally crowned in victory.
Suddenly there was an explosion. And a second, and a third, and there was a clanking sound.
And Mother yelled, "Children, out, out, we've hit a mine."
The first torpedo hit just aft of the bows and destroyed the crew's living quarters. The second exploded right under the swimming pool. The naval auxiliaries had no chance at all. The third torpedo hit the engine room and ripped through the side of the ship up to the railings. Anyone in the lower decks died within seconds.
Everyone was pushed towards the lower promenade deck. And of course that went for my sister Rosemary and me too. I had grabbed her hand and didn't let it go.
The lower promenade deck is entirely lined with safety glass. They're running into a trap.
My sister was standing beside me and I said to her, "Ulla, now we're going to die." "No," she said, and she grabbed my hand again.
I said, "No, we're not going to die. I don't want to die." And I took off my shoe and tried to break the window with it. But it didn't work. And then an officer, or one of the sailors, kept shooting at the window. And then we could push it out.
The two sisters are washed overboard, suddenly separated.
All of a sudden I realized there's water in my ears, in my nose, my mouth. God, I think, please let me lose consciousness. Let me die quickly. Just want to die quickly. And suddenly, I've got air again.
On the upper decks, they're struggling with the boats. The life rafts are frozen, the davits iced up. It's a fight for survival.
A man wanted to get in, had a scarf around his head. He was shoving his way through. I want to get into the boat, want to get in. And the sailor officer saw him and forced him back. Women and children only. Women and children only. He was thrashing around. He just had to get onto the boat. And the officer shot him.
The ship is now listing hard to port. Passengers are holding on for dear life.
Beside me, a woman was hanging on, and next to her 2 children, and next to them a man. He was the only uniformed man I'd seen on board with a swastika armband. The woman kept screaming at him, "Finish it, finish it." Then he took out his pistol, still holding on with one hand, and first he shot the 2 little girls, and then his wife. And then he held the pistol to his own temple, and it didn't go off. He'd run out of bullets. He yelled at me, "Give me your pistol." And I shouted back, "I haven't got one." And then he let go, and slid after his dead wife and his children across the icy, snow-covered deck, and over the side.
As thousands battle desperately for survival, some of the commanders have already made their arrangements. 13-year-old Gunther Meidel makes an interesting discovery.
We got to this cutter. It was pretty full. And among others, there was Captain Peterson, who was supposed to be responsible for the ship as commanding officer. He was an older man. He was already there.
Apparently not the last to leave the sinking ship.
We had the impression, and certainly they said later, that he had got into the boat quite early on because he said, "This is the only chance I have of saving myself."
There are still thousands of people on board the Gustloff, struggling upwards as the ship sinks beneath them.
We climbed onto the rigging. Me first. My mother handed me my sister. I sat her down beside me. I simply sat her down at my feet. If it had been my child, I would probably have put her between my feet. And then I gave my mother my hand. And my mother was gone. Nothing but water. I looked for... I wanted to give my sister my hand or hold her tight. My sister was gone.
Dorrit is just 6 years old. She and her mother drown in the freezing waters of the Baltic. Now, training matters less than instinct. A furious protectiveness may be enough to save a whole family.
A big wave came. Mother shoved us onto a raft, an 8-man raft, I can still remember. And she pushed Manfred onto a small 4-man raft. And she held on to that. And then the wave dragged us away from the ship.
In spite of the heavy seas, all 3 brothers are on the same life raft.
That was something. 3 of us together. But where's Mother? Where's Hannelore, our sister? Where's Granddad?
They will all survive, except Jürgen's grandfather, who'd shepherded the family from the ruins of Königsberg. After 62 minutes, the Wilhelm Gustloff slides to the depths, lights blazing. The air temperature is minus 20 degrees. The water is just above freezing. Most people will die within minutes.
I was swimming behind a life raft. People were hanging on like bunches of grapes, holding on to one another. They tried to hold on to me. I kicked them away. I tell you quite honestly, I kicked them away because they would have dragged me under.
She manages to climb up onto a raft.
There were children floating around us, wearing life jackets. And just imagine, their heads are much, much heavier than their feet. And their heads were in the water, and their little legs were poking up in the air. Afterwards, I could never sing songs to my own child about little ducklings. It still upsets me today.
Das bedrückt mich heute noch.
Now there's nothing to do but wait.
I kept thinking, why is no one rescuing us? Why is no one here? And everyone started shouting in a chorus, help! You can't describe that cry. It came from deep down inside. And no one came.
Just a few nautical miles away is the pride of the German Navy, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper with a torpedo boat escort. By 18 minutes past 10, they're there. But the Hipper already has 2,000 people on board. They're afraid of another torpedo attack.
And then they sailed away again. They've forgotten us. Of course there was a feeling of despair that you'd never forget for the rest of your life. You're floating in a little nutshell and they just sail away.
But the torpedo boat has stayed behind. It picks up survivors.
And then hundreds of people surrounded the ship who needed rescuing. And there were hundreds of dead. You couldn't tell one from the other. And of course it was a terrible situation because what had happened to the Gustloff could just as easily happen to us. But I said, rescue comes first, you have to take the risk. And then suddenly there was a miracle on the bridge. The captain of the Gustloff appeared. That was quite an encounter, quite a surprise. He was dry. And the commander of the U-boat cadets appeared. Dry.
All 5 of the captains survive, while thousands of their passengers die. The torpedo boat saves as many passengers as it can. But they are themselves not out of danger. S-13 torpedoes the rescuers too.
I was standing on the starboard bridge wing and I saw them, quite well spaced. And then there was only one thing to do. Full ahead and hard starboard.
They launched depth charges against the unseen enemy. S-13 makes good its escape. 564 survivors are dragged from the sea.
Then my first officer came to me and said, Herr Kaloi is what we call a lieutenant commander on the ship. We can't pick up anymore. It's over. I said, all right, then we'll stop. And with a heavy heart, we left the site of the sinking.
But now other rescue craft are on their way.
And suddenly there was a ship. A big ship not too far away. Oh dear God, where did that come from? No one saw it coming. And then they threw the rope across and tied it on. And then all I could do is hold up my hands, and they dragged me up, and I fainted.
A sailor stood in the doorway, looking at me intently. I looked back at him, and he says, "There's a girl over there who won't stop wailing about her sister, and she looks a lot like you." And then off he goes and fetches Rosemary, and I jump up. We hug each other and laugh and cry.
Few others had anything to celebrate that day. By first light, the last rescue ships reach the scene. They find total silence.
We got to the site of the sinking. As far as the eye could see, it was covered with clothes, coats, shoes, heaven knows what else floating around.
The lifeboats are still crowded.
And in one of those boats, there were dead bodies. Bodies of women and bodies of children. And my future father went on board, and in the stern he found a woolen bundle, a woolen blanket, stiff with ice. And when he took a closer look, it turned out to be me.
The child is about a year old. It has been in the boat for 7 hours.
Oh, I said, it's a baby. He shifted the blanket a bit, and I could see the blue romper suit. And that used to be a sign it was a boy.
There's no way of knowing who the baby is. But Petty Officer Werner Fick isn't about to abandon him.
And he said, listen, can't I have him? And I said, Werner, that would be a good thing. You haven't got any children. You're old enough. I know your wife. That's a good idea.
A family gets a new child, a boy gets a new home, and a new name, Peter. After the war, many children will be searching for their parents.
Wir suchen unsere Muttis und Tatis, bitte helft sie uns wiederfinden.
And many parents search desperately for their lost children.
Of course, I noticed that couples were continually coming to see my parents, to see if I was their son. And of course, all these visits were a strain for my parents.
Many families are reunited. Not Peter Weiser's, but maybe that doesn't matter. He had much to be thankful for.
It was a family home that was full of love, and the man who found me took me in and brought me up. He's my father, and my real father.
Ships brought the survivors to the western ports that had been their goal. (1,239) passengers survived out of more than 10,000. Over 9,000 drowned in the icy waters, half of them children and babies. And yet no one claims the torpedoing of the Wilhelm Gustloff was a war crime.
The Gustloff was sailing in combat waters with its lights switched off. It was carrying anti-aircraft guns. It wasn't sailing under the Red Cross. It had 1,000 trained U-boat personnel on board. The sinking of the Gustloff was an entirely legal act of war. It wasn't a war crime.
The sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff didn't bring any glory on the crew of the S-13.
For years, our naval staff doubted that Alexander Marinesco had sunk the Gustloff. They believed the Air Force had bombed it. That's why there were no medals. Especially since Marinesco was a very awkward figure for the senior staff. So they made sure he was kept quiet.
Years after his death, Marinesco is finally declared a hero of the Soviet Union. Even this doesn't upset the Gustloff survivors.
Marinesco wasn't responsible for sinking the Gustloff, and the torpedoes were only the catalyst. The whole thing started on the 30th of January 1933, not the 30th of January 1945.
Before the war is over, hundreds of thousands more will die. Combatants, prisoners, and civilians, many of them anonymously. The Gustloff survivors remember.
A survivor once said, "The dead are all right. They have it behind them. We die every year." I've thought about that a lot, and he's right.